Good morning, everybody, and welcome on this gorgeous day. Thank you. We happily welcome as our speaker today Professor Edwin Bryant, Professor of Hindu Religion and Philosophy at Rutgers University. Professor Bryant received his Ph.D. in Indic languages and cultures from Columbia University, where his thesis culminated in his first book, The Quest for the Origins of Vedic Culture. Before coming to Rutgers, he taught Hinduism at Harvard University for 3 years. He has published 8 books and authored a number of articles on Vedic history and culture, yoga philosophy, and the Krishna tradition, and has received numerous awards and fellowships. As a personal practitioner of Bhakti Yoga for over 50 years, a number of them spent in India studying with traditional teachers, where he returns yearly, Professor Bryant strives to combine academic scholarship and rigor with appreciation towards traditional knowledge systems. His translation of and commentary on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is specifically dedicated to contributing to the growing body of literature on yoga. His sequel to this book, entitled Bhakti Yoga, Tales and Teachings from the Bhagavata Purana, also seeks to ground the practices of bhakti in the traditional Krishna-centered framework of the Vrindavan devotional traditions. Professor Bryant has translated the Bhagavad Gita with a new edition, including original Sanskrit, Romanized transliterations, and detailed explanations and commentaries from classical sources, and has been working with his late sister on translating his Penguin translation of the 10th book of the Bhagavata Purana into Italian, their mother language. And another book in defense of a God with form is currently in progress. His previous talks here have proven to be amongst the most popular on our YouTube playlist. And he has his own YouTube channel, edwinbryant.org, where there is an extensive playlist and videos for free. And one other thing, he is involved in a charity for the protection of cows in India, which you can Google and get more information on. The subject of his talk today is, Are the Hindu Gods Mythological? We are very happy to welcome you back.
I don't know whose idea that was. Are the Hindu gods mythological? And it's going to get into trouble, I think, today. Let's see what happens. Actually, Diane, I haven't translated the Bhagavad Gita. I started it and I gave up halfway. Just got sidetracked. But thank you. Okay, and we have a guest with us today, Laddu Gopal. So Mrs. Aura brought her beloved Gopal deity for darshan. So it's kind of a new thing in Vrindavan, actually. Well, at least I've noticed it for the last 10 years, where bhaktas will take their deities with them and walk around, and sometimes in prams, sometimes in a basket. It's quite sweet. It's a sweet tradition. After all, if one accepts the possibility that Bhagavan can manifest in murti form, murti avatara, then it makes sense, right? It's if there's divine presence, then, and especially if it's a little, it's Laddu Gopal, it's little Gopal. You can't leave him alone at home, can you? So, like any good mother, you have to bring him with you. So she brings Laddu Gopal with her, and I when I knew she was coming, I suggested she bring him for our darshana. Okay, so what I have in mind today, first of all, let's invoke a little help from higher powers, and we'll start with a quick invocation. the Greeks have their muses, and in the Indian tradition, we have Vyas and Sarasvati. So Vyas begins the Mahabharata with an invocation, so we'll follow in his footsteps, and then I'll show you what I have planned for this morning, and then we'll see what happens. Narayanam namaskritya narachaiva narotamam Daivi Sarasvatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udilayat. So we offer our respects to Vyas, great author, and Mother Sarasvati. Tato Jayam Udilayat. Then maybe we'll have something to say. Hakandamandalakaram Yena Vyaptam Characharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Apavitra pavitro va sarvavastha gatopi va. Ya smaret pundarika ksham sa bhayabhyantara shuchihi. So pundarika ksham, the one with the lotus eyes, is a good segue into what we're going to do today. So we're going to focus on, typically the term myth is associated with divine beings manifesting in the world, breaking into human history and space and time, as Iliade might put it. So I want to really focus on divine body. Can God have a body? Is that philosophically coherent? Or even, is that theologically necessary for a perfect God? So that's going to be our focus. But we'll start with a little background on the term. I don't want this to be too academic, but I'm an academic. Why did you invite me? So we'll start off with a few words about the Greeks and the usage of the term mythos and logos. Not too much. I'm just giving you a heads up. So if you get bored with any particular section, just hang in there for a few minutes, go use the restroom, come back, and we'll be in the next section. So we'll start with the Greeks, mythos and logos, and then the sort of the dissonance that the philosophers had with the Homeric traditions. We'll say a little bit about that. Because remember, these terms are not Sanskrit terms. And they are imposed upon Indian traditions. And they come laden with baggage, at which, unless you start excavating, you don't see it there. So mythos becomes a derogatory term. So we want to just try to uncover some of that. And then we'll look at where the idea that God cannot have a body, that it's philosophically incoherent to posit that God has a body. Where does that start? So we'll look at Plato and Aristotle and some Greek philosophers, because all of that then informs the early church fathers. And it informs the construction of Christian theology, which then gets transmitted through missionaries and the colonial and colonial power into India. And then Hinduism gets written through those categories. And with the history forgotten or buried in the mists of time. And even Indians adopt these terms without realizing where they're coming from. Terms like mythological. Terms like idol, heavily, comes from the Old Testament, where an idol is not just, it's evil, it's Satan. But you look up Monia Williams' Murti, and you're going to get idol. And so if you don't know all of that, and you look it up, you're in India, okay, what's Murti? And you get idol. So you start using the term idol without realizing what it entails to a Christian ear. If you go to a friend say, hey, let's go to the temple. Oh, what are we going to do there? Oh, we're going to see the idols. Bad start. You'll be going alone. So that's the idea. And then we're going to look at, then we'll move into issues of epistemology briefly. And then we're going to look at the Vedanta tradition and its position on epistemology. And we'll move into then Ramanuja, and his response to the theistic Nyaya. All of this we'll unpack. And then we'll end up with some Krishna stories. Because it's very interesting how the Krishna stories, the Bhagavata Purana is an enormously erudite text. There's nothing like it. So obviously it's my tradition, but we can quantify that. Bhagavata Purana has over 100 commentaries. Next Purana has 2. That's quantifiable. And if you look at the impact Bhagavata Purana has on the aesthetic culture, poetry, everything, dance, it's massively influential. I would make a case it's the most influential text. Maybe Ramayana is somewhat, in terms of these kinds of effects it's had on Indian culture. So we'll look at the Krishna stories, because the Bhagavatam is not just, it's kavya, it's incredible kavya, which makes it distinct from other Puranas, but it's also, whoever wrote it was a philosopher and is responding to all the arguments against the coherence of God having a form without engaging philosophy. And there's a reason for that, which we'll touch upon. Okay? So that's the plan. So that's what we're going to try and fit in. You said we had till like 7 o'clock this evening? So the term mythos then, its origins are obviously, it's Greek. And in the earliest usages of the term, there is no difference between mythos and logos. So we tend to nowadays associate mythos with logos with reason, and mythos with fairy, stories of the god, not true. Historically, not true. So that wasn't always the case. So in the beginning, the terms are used interchangeably. We're not going to go too much into names of all the different Greek philosophers. And at a certain point, then the Greeks are struggling with what to do with the Homeric hymns and struggling with the immoral behavior of the gods. And, of course, we all know about Indo-European, right? We know that the Greek culture is cognate with Sanskrit. It's not that Indra is a saint either. So if you ever have a spare moment, go on Wiki and type in, how did Indra get his eyes? Out of respect for the ladies, I won't tell you the story, but you can do that in your own time. So the immoral behavior of the gods, and so then you get this sort of at a certain point, you get this position as the philosophers emerge, and we'll focus on maybe Plato and Aristotle, because they're the big names, but they weren't the only ones. You get a sort of a turning. Well, Plato actually accepted the gods. It's very interesting, because Plato, he used the word mythos. He wasn't the first, and so mythos were these stories of the gods, and he divided them into 2. He said they aren't true. They're not historically real. But he was able to divide them into those which have moral content. And he said those are good. They may not be true, but they're good for training kids. That's what he said. Good for training our children, because they impart moral messages. So that was good mythos. And then there was bad mythos, which are all the immoral stories. I don't know. It's interesting, because he actually accepted the gods. So that was like a third category. So by the time of Plato, this term mythos, whether they're good stories or bad stories, but they refer to something that's not true, not historically real. So, and pretty much from that time onwards, even though the earlier period, there wasn't this demarcation between mythos and logos. But by the time of Plato, you have mythos is sort of relegated to narratives that are not real. So that's part of the story. So that's how, and pretty much that's how we think of mythology today. We think of it as something that's might have moral, cultural value, but isn't historically real. And if you take that position, you've just eradicated 90% of Hinduism. So be careful what you're going to sign off on, because the mass of Hinduism is basically bhakti, stories, it's devotion. Real life Hinduism, on the ground Hinduism. Obviously, you have your intellectual centers of learning, schools of Nyaya. And we have a great being with us today, Aravind Chakravarti, who I had so much respect for because I've met for the first time. But he's just written some amazing books, one of which has triggered the whole Ph.D. dissertation going on right now in Santa Barbara at what actually happens at the transitional moment when you go from a mental state to an enlightened state. So whether it's Advaita Vedanta, where you're going from the sort of, walking around reciting Mahavakyas, right? Sarvamidam Kalu Brahman, Sarvamidam Kalu, from that sort of mental Mahavakya repetition to an actual experience of Anantam Jnanam Satyam, or whether it's in the Krishna tradition where you put together your murti of Bhagavan in your mind and you concentrate, and all of a sudden there's darshan that dissolves into actual divine presence. There's that eureka moment, if you want to call it that. Is there anything that can be said about that? Are we just transitioning from one ontological dimension onto another? What can, probably reason can't say anything about that, but if we were to sort of try and push reason as far as possible, what could be said about? So she's doing a dissertation on that, thanks to your book. Just so you know, you have a chela somewhere in Santa Barbara. So then, quick word about Plato and Aristotle. So they take the position, right? They're rationalists, and they make inferences. How do you make an inference? Let's think of the Nyaya way. It's not so dissimilar from the Greek. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. There's some differences. So the classical, this is important, the classical, for where we're going to end up, the classical Nyaya inference is, everybody probably knows, wherever there is smoke, so you see a linga, you see a sign. Wherever, in this case, in the classical example, smoke, that is the sign of fire. You don't see the fire, right? There's three ways of knowing the fire. Well, at least three, mostly three pramanas are accepted, not by everybody, but fairly standardly. So you either see the fire, that's pratyaksha. So you know there's a fire. So you have a knowledge, you have a jnana episode in the mind. You have a state of mind, of jnana, of knowing that there's a fire. You can hear about it. Someone can say there's a fire on the mountain. That's the second way. But Nyaya focuses, is the tradition in India, along with Buddhist traditions, that focuses on inference. How do you make an inference, right? This is important when we talk about God's body. You make an inference by, you see a sign of the fire, and there can be no deviation, vyapti. There has to be absolute. Wherever there is smoke, there always, in every instance, has to be fire as its cause. Otherwise, it's not a valid inference. If your opponent can come up with one exception, invalid. But it's based on empiricism. So inference can only deal with empirically perceivable reality. You empirically see the smoke, which is the linga, right? That's why we have a Shiva linga. The linga is the sign of Shiva. Linga is also the genitals. That's a sign of male and female, right? Baby's born. What's the linga? What's the gender? When you look at the genitals, that's the linga. So the Shiva linga then is. You know the word linga. So the smoke is the linga, is the sign. It's the sign of fire. So when you're operating in the realm of philosophy, actually, and science, you are grounded in empirically perceivable facts. Anything beyond that is not. It does not come under the jurisdiction either of sense perception or of inference. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the Greeks are rationalists. So they infer that God cannot have a body. Why? Because remember, all known bodies, all perceived bodies are made of matter. Can't start talking about. They didn't even go there. It never even crossed. We have found no reference to any possible, could there be non-material body? Could there be a body of Satchidananda, Saguna, Brahma? It doesn't even enter the discourse. So nor can it, because that becomes theology, that becomes Shabda, that becomes the third way of revelation. The Greeks didn't have that revelation. They had their adherence to Homer, but nothing like revelation, which emerges in the Christian tradition and, of course, in India. So therefore, the Greeks, and I'm generalizing a bit because, we don't have time, we can't start naming names, it wouldn't mean anything to most of us anyway, inferred that the God, at least, cannot have a body. Plato has a pretty vague and, according to Cicero, useless idea of God's body. You can't tell. Cicero says you don't have a clue what Plato's talking about. Is God the demiurge? Is he the good, the great form of the good? What is Plato's God? Read Cicero. He's quite funny. And Aristotle is here's where you end up with, if you simply use inference. You end up with Aristotle, with a God that doesn't even know the world exists. Right? So Plato says, okay, there's movement, planets are moving, things are moving, so what's pushing it? Right? You can go up the causal chain, but at some point you've got to have a causal mover that isn't moved. And why can't the mover move? Why can't the mover move? Because you're committed to this idea of eternality. And if something is eternal, it can't move, because if it moves, it changes. Right? If something moves, it's changed. It's some way it's changed. So if you're committed to the idea, because if God moves, then who moves God? You end up in an infinite regress. So you end up with a God that is like a magnet. He attracts the movement of the universe by his whatever, beauty. No, not beauty, but some or other. He's attractive, and because it's like a magnet. So a magnet doesn't do anything, doesn't move, just is. And things are attracted to the magnet. Magnet's not responsible. It's not changing. So Aristotle's God is you've heard the phrase, the unmoved mover. Where does that phrase come from? Something has to be behind the movement of things. Because that's all you know. All you know is there's movement. That's where philosophy and science is grounded. There's movement. How do you explain movement? So he ends up, and God can't even be aware of the world, because if you're aware of something, then what? The world is changing. If your consciousness is aware of the world, what's your consciousness doing? I just gave it away. It's changing. So Aristotle's God is not aware of the world. So what is he doing? Self-contemplating. Not too different from, Svarupavasthanam of Patanjali, actually. But if you're looking for a God to worship and pray to, and don't be buying incense for Aristotle. He doesn't even know you're offering it. Yeah. Save your money. So that's what you end up with, though. That's what you end up with if you try to understand God purely through human reason, because your reason has to be grounded in empirically perceived facts. So what to do then if something is non-empirical? So right there, you've loaded the discussion. You've disclosed your metaphysics, which is materialism, not in a shopping in Fifth Avenue sort of way, but materialism and physicalism, that there's only matter. Because of that, and then the idea that God cannot have a body permeates Greek culture, within which Christianity emanates in the Hellenistic Near East, sophisticated culturally and philosophically. Now you have a conflict, because in the Old Testament, Yahweh is very much a bodied being. No question. Yahweh, walks around the Garden of Eden. He has, there's a fantastic book came out recently, just accumulating all the references to God's anatomy. There's no question that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, is a bodied being. And by the way, Christ accepted that. Christ accepted Yahweh as a bodied being. I don't think, we should put that out there a little bit more. Which hopefully, which is what we're working on. We're working on this. It's become a massive, great tone now. So the first 300 years, in the Jewish tradition from 1200 years, the Jews hung on to the idea of a bodied God, Yahweh, a lot longer than the Christians did. because they're an ancient tradition. What's happening in Christianity is, first couple of centuries, right up until the 5th century, Christians believed in a bodied God. Why would they believe that? Because the scripture says so. And if you accept the scripture as divine revelation, then what are your options? So that was the situation. And so around this 3rd, 4th century, you have the emergence. What happens actually is, and Christianity is not really taken very seriously. It's looked down upon by the Greeks as being philosophically impoverished. You know the story of Christ, right? He's preaching to fisher people, and that's bhakti, actually. You find that, but it's the same in India. The greatest bhaktas are shoe workers and sword and mira, and the marginalized, to some extent. Also great theologians. We can't essentialize there, but there's an overlap. But what's happening is that as Christianity is being preached, starting with Paul in Athens, conversion is going on. And you start finding people who are trained in Greek philosophy, Greek philosophers, converting to Christianity, bringing all those samskaras with them. And they're intellectuals. They want some intellectual dignity. That's the dharma of a theologian. The dharma of a theologian is to systematize texts which are usually not particularly systematic in the first place, but also to give intellectual dignity to a tradition. That's the dharma. So you get these amazing Greek philosophers like Origen and Clemens and Jerome converting to Christianity, and there's no philosophy in the New Testament. Where's the philosophy in the New Testament? Christ is a moral preacher. He's not a philosopher. No philosophy there. So this God, fine, vaguely framed. So you get the Greeks, these amazing, actually. Origen is just I do my namaha to Origen. He is just a fabulous character, a bit radical. He took brahmacharya to a bit of an extreme and castrated himself. Probably a little tamasic moment there. And if you think of the Gita says, don't torture. It's tamas to torture your bodily organs. But he's a brilliant theologian, but they're much more Greek in their orientations, and they become converts, but they bring in their training and schooling with them. So they set about. Remember, Christian theology doesn't get really established till Nicaea. It's 400 years, 4th century. So within this time period, there's all kinds of communities and all kinds of discussions about who is Christ. Is he God himself, right? So there was that position. Is he like John the Baptist? More, I think most Indians would see him as a kind of yogi figure, a kind of a charismatic. Jivan Mukta kind of being. All of these discussions are going on, and finally they get the great councils of Christianity. They get worked out, and one of them is anthropomorphism. What are we going to do with the fact that Yahweh is clearly an anthropomorphic being? So then the Greeks bring in Origen and the Greek converts bring in this philosophy that God can't have a body. It's philosophically incoherent. Now pay attention to the presupposition. All bodies are material. Everything is grounded on that. Why are all bodies material? Because that's how inference works. It only works on perceivable reality. All known perceivable bodies are material. Therefore, if you're going to posit a body for God, it can only be material. That's going to be challenged when we get to Vaishnava Vedanta, and even in Advaita Vedanta, marginally so, in Vyavaharika, conventional reality. So therefore, basically, we can call that, basically, the scholar that wrote this book called it an assassination of Yahweh's body. It kind of is. And so from that point onwards, then, if you de-anthropomorphize Yahweh, then you end up then speculating, well, what is God then? And, can you say anything about God? Maimonides, and he's an abstract point. And that just goes on forever. Because mental speculation is infinite. Philosophy is infinite. You want truth, you won't find it through philosophy. It might train you it gives you intellectual rigor, but you're not going to get truth. Who's that? The history of rational thought, East and West, has anyone come out ahead? Has anything become established for all humanity? Of course not. The Bhakti Sutra puts it quite nicely. Philosophy should not be relied upon because there's unlimited points of view and they're all inconclusive. But, not that it's a bad thing. Better to be a philosopher than, sell drugs and guns in the third world. So, so I'm critiquing myself. So, but at some point we have to give it up. Intellectual vanaprastha. What are we going to be on our deathbed? Saying, wait, I didn't finish Kant, but what did Nagarjuna say? How's that useful at the moment of death? Tell me that. So so therefore God, Yahweh, and there was resistance for 2-3 centuries, bitter resistance from those who said, well, what the heck? What's the point of revelation then, if it's going to get overridden by human reason? If you're going to accept the Bible as revelation, what is revelation? It's revealed. God's revealing His nature. If you accept that, then why are you taking Plato and the Greek philosophers and basically overriding? If you believe there's a direct word of God in some form or fashion, you're overriding it. What kind of hubris is that? So there was resistance from pious Christians. But at the end of the day, who knows why? Maybe the church wanted intellectual dignity in this, as they're emerging and trying to become established as a player in the Near East. Not easy to do with Plato and Aristotle and so forth, until you get an emperor on your side, Constantinople, and you get some political muscle on your side. Then that's another thing. So therefore, God gets disembodied. But what are you going to do with all of the references? I'm going to vaguely try to keep some structure to this. I have a tendency to wander all over the three worlds. What are you going to do with your revelation then? Are you going to still imagine you're a Christian, a believing Christian? But what does it mean to be a believing Christian? You believe. What do you believe in? Revelation. If you're a believer, the Jews were much more resistant right up until the 1200s. So what are you going to do with the references to Yahweh all over the place? So a Jewish philosopher who actually made no impact in Judaism, but was massively appropriated and influential in Christianity, called Philo, emerges. And the Jews have the same problem. They're also trying to, some Jews anyway, in Alexandria and places, are trying to get some kind of intellectual dignity. And he comes up with the allegorizing method. That when it talks about God walking, it really means He's omnipresent. When it talks about God stretching out His hand, it really means He's interacting with humans. When it talks about God seeing, it's not really an eyeball, it's God's omniscience. And so all the references, and there's the hundreds of them. Wait, if you look at this book, you'd be amazed. Every part of the anatomy is mentioned in the Bible. Genitals, everything, with Yahweh. So the problem is, you want to be a Christian and you want to be a rationalist. You want to sort of, look good in this kind of Hellenistic culture, and you're getting criticized heavily. Not all of the criticisms have survived, but there's a few that haven't. It's heavy. These Christians, they are philosophically impoverished. You ask them a philosophical question, they go running and say, well, God can do anything. That's the response of a philosophically impoverished mind. God can do anything. And they just disdained it. So they were getting some serious flack. But so Philo then presents what seems to him to be a method that can preserve the integrity of the scripture. Say yes. But then he provides a method for interpreting it non-literally, and that's the method of allegory. Despite the fact nowhere in the Bible does it say that you should read the Bible allegorically, nowhere. But nonetheless, this seemed to be like the only possible solution. If you want to, on the one hand, say, well, we are faithful adherents to the biblical revelation, right? The word revelation. And on the other hand, you want to, put on a good show in front of the sort of sophisticated Greek intellectual milieu. So from that time, pretty much from the 5th century, then you don't see anthropomorphism emerge in any literature, any sort of church discussion from the 5th century onwards. But for 500 years, the idea that God was a bodied being was circulated. Was probably the normative one. Certainly, the first 2-3 centuries, it was normative. Now, back to the presupposition. All bodies are material. You see voices trying to resist this and say, well, God's body is the anthropomorphists that were hanging in there. Oh, well, it's some kind of fine matter, it's some kind of subtle matter, it's some kind of, fiery stuff. They didn't have the metaphysics to mount a defense of divine form. Had they had the metaphysics, which, of course, one could argue the Vedanta tradition has, that if God can't have do you see the problems with material embodiment? A material body, first of all, is limited, right? If God is unlimited, then the body is not going to work very well at all, because a body's here, it's not there. You're sitting here, you're not up here. So limitation, number one problem. Reducibility. All bodies are made of parts. And if take off the parts, you don't have the body anymore. So if something has a material body, by definition, a material body consists of parts. And if it's put together, parts are put together, then they can be separated. If they're separated, then you don't have the original. Right? Famous Buddhist example, the chariot wheel, pull the spokes apart, and you don't have a chariot wheel anymore. So there are various problems with material embodiment. Legitimate. Everybody agrees on this. Vaishnavas, everybody agrees God can't have a material body. But the possibility of a non-material body never surfaces in the Western, let's call it the Abrahamic. The same problem in Islam. You wouldn't think this now, but there was major voices in Islam that accepted the Old Testament. Same reason they have the Old Testament, and most famous of whom was Ibn Hanbal. And he had a very good position. The Christians were like, either they're anthropomorphists or no. God can have no body. But Ibn Hanbal came up with a position actually everyone, a Vaishnava, would accept. And it was called Bila Kaifa. God has a body because the scripture says he has a body, but we don't know what that means or how that can be. So that's respecting the very epistemic value of revelation. If you override revelation with reason, then you don't. Then what's the point of revelation? In the Indian tradition, we said 3 sources of knowledge. One of them is pratyaksha, para and apara. It doesn't matter. It could be higher or lower. It can be pratyaksha of the Atman or pratyaksha of the pot. Inference. You can infer smoke and fire. We can infer there must be an Ishvara. So all of these, and words. Revelation is words. Shruti pramana, agama. Shruti pramana, that which is heard. So if you reject that, which fine, but then you're not faithful either to the Abrahamic tradition or the Vedanta tradition. Then in that case, okay, fine, go be an empiricist. Nothing wrong with that. But you can't claim, or at least it's going to be very hard for you to even with Philo, to justify if you're saying I'm an adherent of the biblical or Vedanta tradition, and then you start overriding the words with reason, then what have you just done? You've undermined the very epistemic value of revelation. If you've done it once, finished. You can do it twice. You can do it 100 tries. We'll toss it out then. Or I'll keep it. It might have some moral value. Maybe teach our kiddies, our children, how to be good boys and girls, but it doesn't have any ontological value. So now by the 5th century, no more talk of a bodied God. And 1,000 years later, the inheritors of this, by that time, by the first Christian missionaries, the Jesuits, actually have early travelers, 12th, 13th century. A lot of it was actually the deities. So I don't want to talk about deities. That's another topic for another day, But really it was the deities that just freaked everybody out. Those of you that are not familiar with the Old Testament, the graven image, the idol, thou must not have false gods, and all of that, heavily imprinted in European, we're not allowed to use terms in the humanities like the European consciousness, but I'm going to say anyway. Maybe Erwin will forgive me. We're not supposed to essentialize, right? Lesson number 1 in the humanities. First day at school, boys and girls, don't essentialize. But actually, it's almost essentialized. Because even if in the Western tradition, either you're a believer and the deity is an idol is a false god, a graven image. Got to keep in mind, when Moses comes down the mountain with the 10 Commandments, the Israelites, what are they doing? They're worshiping Baal. They're worshiping these, baby sacrifice and a golden bull. That's what the Old Testament is completely, and you can't project that onto the deities of 2,000 miles away, another time and place. The beautiful Ladu Gopal, for example. So, but that's the context of the Old Testament admonition against deities. They were what we would consider barbaric human sacrifices, burning babies alive in a golden bull, lighting the fire underneath the bull, and when the baby screamed, it would come out of the muzzle of the bull and sound like a bull roaring. That's where the biblical admonitions, that's what they're dealing with. So it was the deities that freaked everybody out. They were the early travelers, and they thought it was Satan. They thought the Indians are lovely, nice, pious people, and they've been beguiled by Satan. You got this character Satan, whose dharma it is practically to lead people astray and lead people away from God. So therefore, with the advent of and of course things got a little less satanic in terminology as the centuries went by. So you had this. So right away, the idea of a bodied God was just a no-no. You couldn't have a conversation if you were a Vaishnava. You could talk about Bhagavad Gita, oh, very nice, do your duty, karma, everybody likes that. Do your duty, don't be attached to the fruits. Who's gonna mess with that? Everybody's gonna like that. Patanjali, right? Now, not so different from Western mysticism. I mean, the idea, and plus, most Western thinkers accepted a soul of some sort, consciousness, right? So no problem with Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, those kinds of texts. But what's Hinduism? How many people read the Yoga Sutras before Krishnamacharya and Shivananda made them canonical texts for Western exploitation, right? And even the Gita wasn't what it is today. Now it's become like the canonical book of Hinduism, but it wasn't. It was a Vedanta text. It was part of the Prasthana Traya. So, but what is Hinduism? It's bhakti to deities, to the embodied deities, bodied forms. Okay, so let's move now into. Let's just have a peek at a Vedanta position, and I'm focusing more on the Vaishnava Vedanta, which would be Ramanuja and Madhva, and then later on the 16th century traditions, and they had a clear metaphysics. Right. So you have you have in the Indian textual tradition have Shruti and Smriti. You have to work a little hard to make a case for a bodied God in the Shruti. As a matter of fact, they all focus on one verse, the golden person in the sun, which is in maybe the Chandogya, I can't remember. Isha Upanishad. Isha Upanishad talks about the covers, but the golden person in the sun is in an earlier Chandogya. So a lot of the attention is focused on that, which is doesn't make a fantastic case, because you could use it in a Advaita sense and just say, well, that's just the effulgent, that's just Brahman, that's the luminosity of Brahman. But why are they focusing on that? Because if you want to be a Vedantin, then you have to find something in Shruti. Actually, the Smriti is nothing other than bodied gods. What are the Puranas? The stories of Shiva and Vishnu and Krishna and their bhaktas and lots of other stuff, pilgrimage, but most of it revolving around bodied God. Even pilgrim. What's a pilgrimage? You go to a place where a bodied God appeared. So pretty much you could probably more or less essentialize, or certainly generalize, the most of the massive Puranic tradition features bodied gods. But interestingly, Ramanuja and Madhava, they're really playing the game of being Vedantins. They really focus on the Upanishads, and therefore the golden person in the sun becomes their central thing. Okay, so we're getting boring here now. So, but the Vedanta position is you can only know the qualities of God by Shruti Pramana, and that's the fifth or fourth verse of the Vedanta Sutra, Shastra Yonitvat, that Shastra is the source of knowledge, of Brahman, right? Tato Brahma Jignasu, Jamadya Sayata, Shastra Yonitvat. So therefore, the Vedantins take a hard position that to know Brahman, you can't know Brahman by inference. You might know there is a Brahman. It's very interesting. Can I just take a moment and take a little detour with Ramanuja's critique of Nyaya? It was quite interesting because Nyayikas are Ishvavadins. They accept Ishvara. They accept the body. They accept God. In their private lives, they're probably Shaivas. Judging from their invocations, maybe Arvind will have a better opinion and view of that. But certainly Potter sort of pitches them as being probably mostly Shaivas, Nyayikas. So you can't. They could have been anything. Now, Nyayikas are on the same team as Ramanuja. They're theists. And Nyayikas are trying to say, by inference, we can establish that there must be intelligence behind the universe. So it's a kind of intelligent design argument, right? There's no way that this universe could just have randomly, that would have been a ridiculous idea. Even if they knew about Big Bang, it would have been even more ridiculous if they'd known about Big Bang and the statistical impossibility of subatomic particles and forces coming together in such a way that this universe manifests. That would have been absolutely just silly idea. So Nyaya takes the position there must be an Ishvara, intelligence, and they don't go any further than that. Now you think that would be safe enough? You think, okay, good job, right? They've established by inference, but that's all they want to do. They want to establish that there's an Ishvara. But Ramanuja says, and he's on the same playing field, he's a theist, but he has a different agenda. The Nyayikas want to, just against Buddhists or whatever, Sankhya, mostly Buddhists, want to establish that there's a creator God. Ishvara means the person with the most power. Ish is associated with power. And what's the most powerful thing you can do? Create a universe, because we only know the universe. So we can only conceive, the most powerful thing we can conceive of is the creation of a universe. That's all we know. So Ramanuja says he doesn't disagree that there's an Ishvara, but he's saying your epistemology for establishing that is inference, and if you use inference, it's going to backfire. By your very own method, if you say Ishvara is like the potter, a pot needs a potter maker, a potter, he's going to say, using your inference, your method Ishvara must be bodied. He must have a material body. We don't see any disembodied creators. Your Nyaya methodology is based on perception, and everywhere you see a product, a palace or a pot, it's made by someone, fine. But Ramanuja takes it a step further. It's made by someone in a body, and that body's material. And he says, if you Nyayikas are trying to use reason, you're going to end up with a bodied God. And then you've got all the problems that the Greeks pointed out. Bodies are limited, material bodies are limited. They're made of parts which are reducible. And the Indian arguments against bodied God are actually add stuff that the Greeks didn't. Number one, they say this. If God, any creator needs a body. So before creation, you have to have a body. You have to have a body to create, but you haven't created yet, so how can you have a body? So then you need another God to make the body of the God who's going to create. Well, how's he going to do that unless he has a body? So they have an infinite regress argument, which the Greeks didn't actually employ. So the arguments can be a little bit different, all of which pointing to the philosophical incoherence or unacceptability of a bodied God. So Ramanuja is saying to Nyaya, he's not saying there's not God, he's saying you've got the wrong methodology. You want to know God, you have to do Vedanta. It has to be revealed. You cannot arrive at that God through inference, because if you use inference, you're going to end up with a bodied God, and then you've got everybody shooting at you. Plato, the ghosts of Plato and Aristotle, and Mimamsa. These are Mimamsa arguments, and Mimamsa uses it against the whole idea of a God. Anyway, let's get to the good stuff. So, are we all right? Are we, So, so then the Vaishnava tradition then, it basically drawing on the Puranic tradition, propose that God has a body. Why? Because it's revealed everywhere. It's in Revelation, right? Same problem as the Christians. It's revealed everywhere. And nowhere does it say you can use allegory. Or when allegory is to be used, it's very clearly stated. There's two sections in the text I work with, Bhagavata Purana. It's very clearly stated. This is an allegory. The merchants lost in the forest, clearly an allegory, and they state it as such. But nowhere else does it say that these stories are mythological, which is what we're supposed to be talking about, right? Nowhere does it say that they are to be interpreted metaphorically or allegorically. So the Vedantas come along, but they have a metaphysical response, which was lacking in the Abrahamic traditions. For those the anthropomorphists that are trying to hang on to the idea, because the Bible said so, that God has a body, well, Vedanta has the idea of what a non-material body will look like. And of course, in Sanskrit, matter is achit. So the opposite, if that's what material is, and the opposite is achit. So then the Vaishnava theologians propose, well, the Bhagavata Purana, the text proposes, not that they're proposing it, but they're drawing our attention to the fact that in the Puranas, Bhagavan's body is not made of matter. It's made of Chetana, it's made of Chit. Okay, Sat Chidananda, you've heard the term Saguna Brahman. It's Brahman. What is Brahman? It's consciousness. Consciousness cannot be separated. What's the first teaching of the Gita? You can't split it, you can't burn it, you divide it. It's immeasurable, all of that. So therefore, Bhagavan's body is consciousness, and it's not subject to limitation. First of all, because everything is, according in Vaishnava theology anyway, everything is just the Shakti of that body. In terms of the gunas, right? Devi hi yasha guna mayi mama maya. This is Krishna says, the gunas, which is Prakriti. Prakriti is nothing other than the gunas. Mama maya, it's an emanation of Bhagavan. So in that sense, indirectly, Bhagavan is all-pervading. The body, the form, which I know Advaita Vedanta is going to have a different position on this, which we can discuss. So therefore, a body made of consciousness is not subject to any of the critiques. And because consciousness is eternal, it doesn't need another God to make it and another God and end up in an infinite regress. So therefore the Vaishnava contribution, Vaishnava Vedanta, Advaita is a little bit different. We'll get to that. Is that God has a body because revelation says it does, and if you're going to accept revelation, then that's what you have to accept. And they would point to the Old Testament and say, well, your own sacred text says the same thing. Have you read the passage of Ezekiel? The prophet Ezekiel has a vision of God on a throne. Just go online. Ezekiel's vision of God. It's clearly an anthropomorphic being, but all over. That's the most dramatic vision. But there's plenty of visions. God appears to the Israelites and the Red Sea and so on and so forth. So okay. So therefore, the question is one of epistemology. What source of knowledge do you use for what function, for what purpose? If you can see something, you don't need to infer, or you don't need anybody to tell you. But if something is a priori by definition non-material, your sense perception and your inferential processes have no access to it. And if you try to use inference and apply it to the nature of God, you're going to end up with Aristotle, with a narcissistic, self-absorbed prime mover. He just sits there contemplating himself and totally unaware of the world. You want that? Want to do bhakti to the prime mover? Put him up on the altar there, right in the middle. I don't know what a prime mover would look like, but so that's what you end up with. Or you end up like Plato, completely, according to Cicero, just totally, Cicero says he's confused. He has no coherent position on what God looks like. That's what you're going to end up with if you use reason. Or you're going to go and follow some of the Christian fathers and end up with some infinitesimal point, or whatever abstract concept you're going to end up, and it's going to be debated forever, and there's never going to be any certitude or general acceptance. So if there is a God, and of course the discussion is, if there's no God, then that's a different kind of discussion, and then that's not the topic of our talk today. So all of this then gets projected onto the Indian deities, that they can't be God, because God can't have a body, right? According to that whole genealogy we just laid out, because all bodies are material, starting with the Greeks, right? Appropriated by the church fathers, right? Then transported over the seas and imposed on India, so therefore God can't have a body, right? If you start off with that premise, then who is this Vishnu that you're encountering then? He's not God. So what is he then? Well, at the beginning, he was Satan. But in the course of time, they toned that down a bit. Probably someone said, oh, you're not going to make very many converts if you say that. So it gets toned down, and we get this word mythological with its prehistory. That if you want to be a little polite, then you say, well, the stories have some cultural value and moral value, but they ain't real, they ain't true. God cannot have a body. And at which point you've just basically totally undermined the vast majority of real life on the ground Hinduism, which is devotion. So what to do? So therefore, it's important to sort of trace these kinds of histories. Also trace the metaphysical presuppositions. What is the metaphysical presupposition? That bodies can only be material. Why do you say that? Because I only see material bodies. And inference is parasitic on empiricism. Inference operates, it's predicated, it's parasitic on empiricism. So therefore, what if God... But everybody, any theist is going to say God is non-material. It's really curious. Okay, so Ramanuja's... let me finish. It's really curious that theists are able to accept non-empirical qualities of God like omnipotence and omniscience. We don't see omniscient beings in a sense perception. We don't see omnipotent. So they're okay accepting that, which actually Ramanuja points out to Nyaya. He says, you've just broken your own methodology. Because Nyaya says, Nyaya agrees. Nyaya also thinks bodies can only be material, right? Which is probably borrowed from Mimamsa. And they accept, okay, so God doesn't have a body. So then the opponent will say, the Purva Paksha, the opponent will say, but he doesn't have a body. How does he create? You yourself, you Nyayikas, are using the very empirically perceived argument that a potter has to have a body to make a pot, and you're saying, and from that you're saying all products need a product maker, but all known product makers have bodies. So you've just made a jump, because Nyaya then says, because Nyaya realizes the problems of positing a material body. So they say, no, he doesn't have a body, he creates by will. And then Ramanuja says, well, you just broken your own methodology then. We don't see any wills floating around creating. We don't see any abstract wills floating around in the cosmos creating. So your method of inferring a cause from the effect, fire from smoke, you've just turned your back on your own methodology by saying that there must be a creator because all products have a creator, all created things have a creator, all products have a producer. Well, all producers have bodies. If you say that he doesn't have a body, you've just destroyed your own methodology. That's Ramanuja's position. And why is he doing that? Because he wants to say you can't establish the qualities of God from logic. It has to be revealed. So let's move on and say something about the Bhagavata Purana. It's very interesting because it's almost like... by the way, the other property that Indian antibodies, the antibody arguments that God can't have a body, the infinite regress argument, did you get that? Right? You can't have a body before creation. You have to have a body to create, but you haven't created yet. So how does God have a body then? Well, another God, right? That's the infinite regress. The other one is karma. Again, these are two arguments that didn't surface in the Greek traditions. And the karma argument is all bodies are the product of karma. Why? Because all known bodies are the product of karma. If you're going to go with inference, can't just pick and choose. Got to be, adhere to your methodology. Otherwise, your people like Ramanuja are going to come after you. So all known bodies are made of karma. So therefore, for God to create, he needs a body. So first you got the infinite regress problem. You got a second problem. That means God's subject to karma. Well, that's not particularly an idea of God that's going to get much traction, is it? Right. So now we have. So therefore, the Vaishnava Vedantins are going to say only scripture. So what do we have? We have the Puranas essentially. Even though they try their hardest to really milk as much as they can from the golden person in the sun, when they're playing the game, when they got the hat of the Vedantin on, but then they take it off and they put their Puranic hats on. And of course, then these are great bhaktas. But the Bhagavatam, it's almost as if the Bhagavatam is responding to these rational arguments, but not presenting itself as rational. Because it's taking the position it can only be revealed. If you take the position that God can only be revealed, you don't want to start bringing in... It's not that there's not rational arguments. You could use them as supporting role. They can support Scripture. They can't surpass Scripture. This is where Vedantins are going to say the Abrahamic traditions have gone astray, and Nyaya has even gone astray. So the Vedanta position then is... Think about it. If there is a God, isn't it obvious that any kind of God worth thinking about is going to be transcendent? It's going to be beyond Prakriti. So the minute it's beyond Prakriti, no Prakritic methodology is going to have access to that being. It's obvious. So therefore, that being has to reveal himself. Herself, in the case of Bhagavati. It's almost like the stories of Krishna include responses to the rationalists without actually formally adopting the rational inferential process. For example, what happens when Yashoda is nursing Krishna? Okay, the idea is if you have a body, you're limited. And what happens when Yashoda nurses Krishna and he opens his mouth? She sees the whole universe in the mouth. So that's not a limitation. That's transmitting a message. That's a message against the rationalists. You think a body is limited? How? Take a look at this then. How about this Leela? And the Bhagavatam loves just deriding the rationalists. Even the Gita. Avajananto mam mudha. How about that for a strong term? Manusam tanum ashritam. Parambhava majananto. The mudha, that's not very polite. Fools. Moha. Fools. Avajananti mam. They don't know me. This Gita. Gita's pretty, kind of innocuous. It's kind of, it's not like the Bhagavatam, which is, Krishna and gopis and all of that. Manushantanum, when I take the human form. And by the way, in the Abrahamic tradition, there's a huge discussion about what does it mean, imago Deo, God is made in the image of man. That triggered 1,000 years worth of discussion. What does it mean? And, the position now is, well, he's made in the image of man because God is reason. Not because of the form. But anyway, so there's that's an example that the Bhagavatam is almost playfully kind of dismissing the rationalists' position without even engaging in an inferential process. Take another example. When Krishna's dancing with the gopis, it's not like the gopis, like you go to a supermarket and you take ticket number 134 and you wait for your turn. Each gopi has her own Krishna. How is limitation there? Where's the limitation there in form? When Brahma steals the cows and the calves, because even he's confused. Brahma's confused. He's like, hang on a minute, is this Vishnu? How can this be Vishnu? This little toddler's crawling around in the sand of Vrindavan. Is that Vishnu? Let's check it out. Let's check this out. Right? So he steals all the cows and puts them away in a cave by his Maya. And Krishna just manifests. All the gopas and all the calves are put in the cave, and Krishna just duplicates every single calf, exactly the same. Every single gopa with the flute, everything identical. And they go for a whole year. It's a beautiful Leela. Actually, because in Vrindavan, the mothers of the other gopas, they sort of secretly were thinking, oh, wouldn't it be cool, to have Krishna as my child, right? You can't come out and say that. Like, I got to lose a child. I wish I had that child. You can't come out and say that. but kind of secretly, right? They love their kids, but they seriously love Krishna. And it says Krishna did this to allow all of the mothers of Vrindavan to actually have Krishna as their child. Where's the limitation in that then? In terms of form, embodiment. And then when Brahma comes back, he's totally confounded. Remember, Brahma is he's the supreme rationalist. He's a rupa made of buddhi. His form is not even like he doesn't even have the 5 elements. He's the creator. Even, right, forget about Plato and Aristotle. Brahma has a form made of intelligence, and he comes down, he's totally confounded. What the heck is going on? He checks in the cave, they're still there. Who is this lot then? So that's reason. That's the Bhagavatam saying, as we say in Italy, to reason. You cannot understand the nature of God with reason. So then it's a beautiful story. And then you get the Brahma prayers and then all of those gopas turn into majestic Vishnu forms. And Brahman, it says, he's like a doll in front of the goddess in the temple. He's just like a puppet. It's just like a piece of cloth, and he just does a full dandavat, and in the most beautiful prayers, he realizes what a fool he's been, thinking that with his reason, he can mess with Bhagavan. So the Bhagavatam has these stories. What about when Krishna's mischievous and Yashoda goes and gets the ropes? You know the story. She gets the rope, she ties it round, 2 inches too short. Gets another rope, 2 inches, and all the ropes in the house, 2 inches. Well, where's the limitation in that then? If bodies are limited. So it's like the Bhagavatam is playing with the rationalist, saying, you think with your intelligence that you can understand the nature of Bhagavan with your little cause and effect mottos, such as limitation and reducibility and what bodies can only be. Well, check this out then. So that's the position of the Bhagavata Purana. So to all of that, but I would like to add an argument which I don't, which is made indirectly, and let me know what you think, and then we can maybe end on that. We had our 45 minutes. Yeah, we have to have a limitation in time, even though So let's go with Bishop Anselm. This is nice. It's a nice note to end on. Bishop Anselm, great Christian theologian, came up with he's trying to prove the existence of God, actually, a bit like the Nyayikas, but I'm going to reformulate his argument. He came up with a definition of God. God is that being than whom nothing greater can be conceived. Say it one more time. God is that being than whom nothing greater can be conceived. Because something greater can be conceived, well, then that other thing is God then, not the God you're proposing. Okay, so therefore we have words like omniscient and omnipotent, right? So we all have some power, but God is omnipotent. And basically the definition is, with most Indian rationalists, the most powerful thing we mentioned is to create a universe. If you create something, Nyaya would tell you, you have to know everything about the ingredients of what you're creating. So if you're creating a universe and you know everything about all the ingredients, obviously, if you're going to make something, if you're baking a bread, you have to know what you're putting in there. So if what you're making is the universe, then you have to know everything about the universe. Well, that's just another way of saying omniscient. So now we've got two properties of God, omniscience and omnipotence. And sometimes Christians will add omnibenevolent. Now, everyone accepts God has infinite qualities, but at least those two you can derive, perhaps, when Ramanuja might not accept it, but, with some form of inference. Now, Vishnu Purana says God has 6 qualities, just picking out 6 main qualities. So they agree with those two, tick those boxes, omniscient, omnipotent. Interestingly, his most famous person, there's no one more famous, because even if you're an atheist, you still are you're still still dealing with God. So even for an atheist, God is famous, right? What are atheists doing? Trying to negate the existence of God. So therefore, he's central to atheism, actually. So fame, knowledge, Aishwarya, so that would be omnipotent. And interesting, you have renunciation. Because think about it, if you're supremely detached, then what? Nothing has power over you. If you're attached to something, that thing has power over you. If you have a desire, that has power over you. So therefore you are now subservient to that thing. So therefore the supreme being has to be supremely detached. Doesn't mean it doesn't love. It has nothing to do with love. It's just a detachment. There's no... obviously, if you keep going into the theological realm, then obviously Krishna's attached. That's another dimension. He's attached to Radha and the gopis. But that's a whole other sort of dimension almost. But one of the things, the 6, one of them is strength, which is pretty close to Aishwarya, but strength, balatvam. But the other one is Shri, beauty. God has to be beautiful to be supremely omni. So one could ask Bishop Anselm, what is better, a beautiful God or a non-beautiful God? What's better, beauty? Or you could say, well, I don't, someone, you ask students in the 100 students in Hindu field, someone would say, well, I like ugly people personally. But generally speaking, beauty, I think most people would say God has to be supremely beautiful. And beauty in Sanskrit, rupa, is the same word for beauty and form. Where is beauty? We're talking about visual beauty now, not beautiful music. And the Sanskrit term is more precise. In English, you could say beauty, not necessarily for visual. You might want to extend it, beautiful sound or something. Sanskrit is more precise, rupa. Beauty manifests in form. So if God is to be that being than whom nothing greater can be conceived, he has to be beautiful. And if he has to be beautiful, then he has to have form, my friends. And this has been understood in the Indian devotional traditions. And of course, then you want to address all the other problems, infinite forms, non-reducible, all that. It's just kind of subtext. And the Bhagavata Purana especially stresses beauty. Because what does Krishna do? Hides his majesty. He hides the other qualities. Omnipotence, omniscience. He hides that. Why? For love. You can't. How are you going to love? This omnipotent, omniscient being. You're going to be terrified. Or at least you'll be awed, but it's not going to be love. You might be wonder, and you can sit there for all eternity, like Shantabhav. This is called Shantabhav. And that's a form of moksha. No problem with that. But not a form that the Bhagavatam's interested in. The Bhagavatam's interested in love. And to love, you have to hide your majesty. What do parents do with a 2-year-old? You could be president of the United States. You go home, you sit down, you play choo-choo train. You hide your power. You hide your power. That's love. You cannot have, arguably, you can't have love if there's power. It interferes. And creates fear a lot of the time. What's all this namaha, namaha, namaha all about? It's distance. It's not intimacy. Alleluia, namaha, right? These are, when Krishna, when Yashoda sees Krishna on the universe in Krishna's mouth, she immediately starts going namaha, namaha. She starts talking like a Vedantin. Well, Krishna doesn't want that. So immediately he covers her with Yogamaya, and it says memories are erased. She picks him back up. She drops him. It picks him back up, and it says she returns to her state of mind full of love. So that revelation of majesty destroys the love. And Krishna tradition is about love. So this is the unique feature. And so therefore Krishna hides, the majesty hides. But what the Bhagavatam doesn't hide of those qualities, it hides his omniscience, right? He's a little kid, he's not manifesting omniscience, omnipotence, none of the other qualities. But the one quality that he does manifest is beauty. Right through the Bhagavatam. It just goes on and on and on. Lotus eyes, lotus this, lotus that is so beautiful, is exquisite. Why? Well, partly for meditation, actually. Because if you meditate on God, you have to internalize those descriptions. And in the days before literature, you had to, you're sitting and meditating, you have to recreate that form. And so therefore the text is repeating and repeating, which normally is the flaw, a dosh, both in Western literary traditions and in Sanskritic literary traditions. Repetition is a flaw. Unless Mimamsa would say, okay, fine, you can, one of the 6 things in Mimamsa, you repeat to stress, but not like that. Not like lotus, lotus, lotus. And why the lotus anyway? How do you describe God's beauty if you're a poet? If you've had a darshan Bhagavan, and then you go back and you want to share some of that, to encourage people to take to the path of bhakti. How do you describe it? It's non-prakritic. It's saguna brahman. There's no. You say Krishna's blue. What does that mean? It's not blue like that. Thank God that was there. It's not. It was. But the closest thing in our human repertoire to whatever Krishna's color is. It's more like this than it is like this. But why the lotus? For the poetic, again, essentializing, but fairly essentialized, the most exquisite prakritic thing is the lotus petal. For the poet, maybe in the Shakespeare tradition, it's the red rose. Different conventions, different traditions have different conventions. So the lotus is exquisite. That's why you have that Indian art with the sort of, the eyes like that, like almost like Egyptian art. That's supposed to be a lotus leaf. So therefore that's the best you've got in the realm of Prakriti. So lotus feet, lotus eyes, lotus everything, is an attempt to describe this beauty. So where do we want to end up? That beauty is form. So therefore, we could end up with a strong statement that for God to be God, he must have a form. Because God must be beautiful. So that's a different argument from God must have a form because Scripture, that's actually an inferential argument. I'm just going against everything I've argued for. I've just said inference cannot establish the qualities of God. Well, fine. So I'm contradicting myself. That's a koan. Deal with it. Right? If God, by inference, is to be the most, and by Anselm's definition, the most, that being than whom nothing more perfect can be conceived, he must be beautiful. That's not an argument you see in the Bhagavatam. I'm just throwing it out there. And therefore, for God to be God, and we'll finish here, and we wait for Dr. Chakravartin's Purva-paksha response. But unless you want to say something about the difference between Advaita and Vaishnavism in this, because it might be important given that we're in an Advaita-derived tradition. But anyway, we finish with, if there is a God, and God is a supreme being than whom nothing more perfect can be conceived, God must be beautiful, God must have a form. How about we leave it there and see if you have any response or...
If you have a question, please put up your hand. Then it will be close and...
Just say your name. Hello. Okay.
Hello.
Thank you for your lecture. My name is Anna, and I have a question. So, I don't mind God to have a rupa. Let him have as many rupas as he wants. It's okay. But so, for example, for those who worship Krishna, he will be manifested as a Krishna. For those who worship him as a Jesus, he will be manifested as a Jesus, and etc., etc. So many rupas and forms. So here, my question is not about the form. Let him have form. But what about ultimate reality?
About what?
Ultimate reality.
Well, that's the way you frame that is an Advaita way of framing it. Which is fine, but let's just be clear of the difference. The Advaita way of framing this is that there is Paramarthika, ultimate reality, and Vyavaharika. And in the Vyavaharika realm, there's a creation, there must be a creator, right? But it's mithya. It's mithya. Be clear about this, because you often hear a soundbite like, Advaita Vedanta accepts saguna and nirguna. Actually, no. Advaita Vedanta accepts nirguna Brahman because saguna Brahman is mithya, false. So you can't say they accept both. One is false and one is real. Jagat mithya, Brahman satyam. And in the Advaita tradition, then Ishvara is actually Brahman reflected in Maya. Of course, you have a Ramanuja would say, you haven't even established what Maya is, so how can there be a reflection? But let's bracket the response to that. So that's an Advaitin way of thinking that the world is false. Now, be clear, Advaita Vedanta is a sub-school. It's opposed by all the other Vedanta traditions. It's opposed by Nyaya, it's opposed by Sankhya, it's opposed by Yoga, it's opposed by Mimamsa, it's opposed by Buddhism, it's opposed by Jainism, even the Shakta traditions, which are monistic in their own way. So it's one tradition, a noble and honorable one, but the response to that, what about ultimate reality? The question implies that the forms are not ultimate reality. Whether you want to say they're mithya or some other kind of derived, they have some other derived ontological status, they're not ultimate. That's a Advaita Vedanta position. It's not the position of anybody else. So in the Vaishnava tradition, Saguna Brahman is eternal, Vaikuntha is eternal, Goloka is eternal. They are ultimate reality. They flip the narrative. They would say Brahman is just Jyoti. It's just the Brahma Jyoti. It's just the effulgence of God, like the sunlight to the sun. So I think it's important to not assume that these are derivatives, secondary. The form is somehow secondary or derivative of something higher, some ultimate thing. You can assume that if you subscribe to Advaita Vedanta metaphysics, but almost all other schools don't. So then you have a conflict, then you have to study, do your svadhyaya, and decide what makes more sense to you, what you wish to subscribe to, but you're subscribing to a metaphysical view that is not a universal view. So that's important to establish. And who is it that's deciding anyway? Samskaras. Samskaras. Why isn't Advaita Vedanta find Advaita Vedanta coherent and philosophically viable, and why is it that Vaishnavas find it incoherent and massively problematic? So these are samskaras that are going to be making those kinds of choices, and then you end up another infinite regress. Where do those samskaras come from, or past life, or whatever, and then you end up, you can't answer that. That you run it, there's no answer to that. But all I'm saying is, the idea that the forms are not ultimate is very much embedded in one sub-tradition. It is not universal.
So is it like all the forms in Jesus form and the Virgin Mary and the Ganesh form, Shakti and Krishna and Shiva, they are all like in line and they are all real and they are all God, like this?
Yeah. That the Absolute is infinitely full of form, guna, rupa, but everything's made of Satchidananda Brahman. Otherwise, you run into a Satkaryavad problem. Why does this world have cause and effect? Satkaryavad. Olive oil is an effect. Well, it has to come from olives. It can't come from oranges. There has to be a connection between the nature of the effect and the nature of the cause. So if you're going to say this world is full of rupa and guna and qualities, and then you're going to say that the cause of that is no rupa, then where does the rupa come from? Now Shankara deals with it by saying, well, it's Maya. Where does Maya come from? Where's the ontological location of Maya? This is an old problem that Vaishnavas have always, the Vedantins have had to deal with, and it causes the split into various Advaita. I must say, all philosophies have a problem. I'm not picking on Advaita Vedanta. But I tell you one thing. Why do you think Ramanuja, he has a commentary this big, 100 pages, before he even starts 111, is against the Mahapurva Paksha? Why? Do you think he cares whether the world is real or not? That's not the issue. If you follow Sankhya, which does accept a real world, but when you're in a state of Sarupa Vastanam, you're in an infinite state of pure consciousness, you're not aware of the world. Now, whether it's there or was never there is a minor issue. So that's not the issue, the individualization of the Atman. That's not the issue. If the world is false or real, is the Atman an individual or not? What's the issue? You're going to say that Ramanuja and Madhva and the Vaishnavas' beloved Bhagavan is Maya? Then they come out with 6 guns blazing. You're going to say that that beloved Bhagavan is also a product of agyana, of avidya? You got a fight on your hands. Meaning, a philosophical. You have a philosophical issue that will never go away. It never has. These schools are trained to this day in Udupi and the centers of learning. So the real issue is not whether the world is real or false, not whether the Atman is Vishishta, individualized, or Sarvavyapaka, because everybody accepts it's Sarvavyapaka, that it's infinite, but does the fact that it's infinite mean there's only one infinite Atman, or can you have a plurality of individual Atmans, all infinite? Like you can have a plurality of lights all pervading the same room, but they're all individual. That's a technical issue. Who cares? Who cares if the world is real or false? When you're in Svarupa Vastanam, you're not aware of it. I tell you what bhaktas care about. Don't be saying Bhagavan is mithya, because that's their beloved goal of life for all eternity. It's not just a method. In Advaita Vedanta, bhakti is a method. Purifies the mind, like Vedic ritualism. Okay, you can sort of say it's, yamimam pushpitam, avipashchitaha, Krishna says, people not so smart. But it purifies. Everybody accepts that. But if you're going to say bhakti is like that, it's just a method, and at the end everything dissolves into sarva midam kalu brahman. If you're going to take that position, and you've just included Bhagavan in that category, don't expect to make friends with Vaishnavas. And so that story is an ever ongoing story. And if I may say one thing, if you really want to study philosophy, don't just immerse yourself in one school. You have to see what is when your school is the Purva Paksha, the opposing point of view, what are the other schools saying? Then you get a sense of your Achilles heel, of your school, and Vaishnavism has its Achilles heel, or should we say Duryodhana's thigh, your weak spot. They all have. And when you read what other schools say about your school, A, you become a little bit more humble. B, you become a little bit more respectful to other traditions. And C, you can have conversations. Because you can't have a conversation with somebody that's convinced that only that their point of view is absolutely correct for all time. So I think Ramanuja's critique of Advaita is a great place to start. And Madhava, he gets pretty fiery, even more so. So therefore, the idea of a reality beyond form needs to be contextualized into a very specific, limited sub-school called, which is now, of course, attracted. It's expanded. It's clearly an important school. No, I'm not suggesting it's not, but not to assume, because what happens then is Advaita Vedanta it's when you talk about Vedanta, it's almost assumed you're talking about Advaita Vedanta. What do you think? Right? And not only is Advaita Vedanta kind of like sort of the sort of, you've taken the role of Vedanta writ large, but Advaita Vedanta writ large has almost taken the whole role of Hinduism. And that's not the case historically. And it's not the case on the ground in India today. It might be the case in exported Hinduism in the West, but it isn't. So these are all wonderful, they all have venerable, noble traditions, but let's not blend them all in some kind of a new agey sort of every one size fits all, because one size doesn't fit all. They debated each other for centuries. It may be nice and convenient to say, everything is one, but actually it isn't. And therefore, it's good to be clear. Okay. Yes, sir. We can take. We have time for two. I don't mind. Whatever.
Yeah, two. Right here.
Yeah. My name is William, and thank you very much for this talk. You said something which I found funny, which is that if you want truth, don't study philosophy. And
I should say, if you want absolute truth, can I modify that?
Yeah, and I studied philosophy, and I completely agree. But I wanted to ask about the alternative, which it sounds like is having.
You can always do theology instead,
right? And practice,
and then it's given to you.
And that's actually I want to ask.
I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry, but by the way, theologians are all philosophers.
Yeah,
they're totally grounded in the state of the art of philosophy, whether it's a Ramanuja or whether it's a modern day theologian in the Department of Philosophy in Rutgers. They are philosophers. They're gonna leverage philosophy as far as it would go, but they understand its limits. It's not that theologians are not philosophers; they absolutely are, and they're going to bring that with them, but they're going to take that extra step, which is realizing what we just said, and then being open to reveal truth. But I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask, is about your experience with practice, and if you feel comfortable talking about revealed truth and what methods you've used personally and what you've learned through them.
Well, I'm a bhakta. I follow the Vrindavan devotional tradition, and so now I'm retiring. and the only book I'm taking with me is the Bhagavata Purana. It's got everything in it. At some point, you have to give enough of buddhi vritti. So you pick your canonical source if you want to take that leap. If you don't, then remain a philosopher and you die and you won't get moksha. Because your mind won't be fixed. What's it going to be fixed on? Right? What is it? Antikale, right? Yam yam vapi bhavam smaran antikale. Whatever you think of at the time of death, that's your next birth. Of course, along with karma. So if you're a philosopher, you won't get moksha. You might get a good birth if it's a venerable pursuit, but you won't get moksha. If you're seeking moksha, at some point you have to take a leap. You use philosophy to discuss with others, to give a rational, respectable presentation of your tradition. You don't do it in your private life. What are you going to do philosophy for? If you have a connection with Bhagavan, that's it. You do your pujas, your japa, you do your spiritual practices. In our tradition, it's deity. It's worship of the deity. It's japa. You take the mantra of the rupa that has attracted your heart, the form of God that attracts your heart. That's Bhagavan coming to you. It's not you. If you open your heart to Bhagavan, Bhagavan will come in the form that appropriate to your whatever sanskaras. Who knows what? How that works. It's a hetuki. It has no cause. It's grace. Can't get it by yourself. Patanjali you can get by your own ego and willpower. You want a vision of your Atman, Sarupa, you can do it by sheer brute, gritty clenching of the teeth, chitta vritti nirodha. Close down your mechanism and you can have an experience of your own Atman. Not Bhagavan. Because that would mean you could conquer Bhagavan by your mind. Kush can't. So how do you get Bhagavan? It's grace. And how do you get grace? You just you surrender. Do you think Bhagavan's impressed with all this Vedanta? Do you think he's impressed with any of that? All the bhakti stories, the Vedantins are ridiculed in the great bhakti stories as just idiots, and as being trapped by their ego. So if you seek a bhakti practice, the only one way to get it is to surrender. Then Bhagavan will come to you. And if that doesn't seem to you, if the samskaras of your mind, either philosophically, you say, well, why do we need to believe in God? Let matter be eternal, like say Buddhists would say, or there's other philosophical ways of thinking about reality. And if that appeals to you, then that's fine. But if it's obvious to you that there must be a Bhagavan and it isn't you, because that would be so delusional that hardly worth engaging, then you surrender. What else are you going to do? When bhaktas do all this stuff, yamas, niyamas, all of that, but they're not doing it thinking they can conquer Bhagavan. They're doing it to just try to catch Bhagavan's attention. Just look at me. I'm doing everything that I can do in my little, frame of reference. So I'm doing my japa, I'm doing my puja, I'm doing all of this stuff, I'm following the yamas. So you're a regular yogi, but you're not doing it thinking that those practices, you're going to attain truth by those practices. You're trying to attract the kripa. And then Bhagavan will reveal. That's the only part, that's the path of bhakti. It's very different from jnana. Jnana is your own resources. Yoga is your own resources. Not bhakti. It's a different category of yoga altogether. It's a categorical mistake to say yoga, karma, jnana, bhakti are all paths to the absolute. They're not. They're categorically distinct. Jnana and dhyana take you to Atman. Bhakti is a different thing altogether because there's another Atman. Unless, of course, you're in Advaita, then that's a different thing. But in any other tradition, or certainly the Vaishnava traditions, Shaiva Siddhanta also, it's a different category because Bhagavan is a different category. So the traditions that accept Bhagavan as a different category it's about surrender. But there's also bhakti, which comes subsumed under jnana, where you do pujas, but ultimately the goal is jnana, is Atman. So there's no... Hinduism has all of these... It's hard to make lines and demarcations. But I would make one. I would say there's so many ways of dividing everything. Those traditions that take you to your innermost self, whether your self is that of Advaita Vedanta, whether it's that of yoga as an individual, whether it's the momentary interdependent one of Buddhism, whatever it is, it's yourself, we can put in the category of jnana. And those traditions that accept an eternal other, eternal, not some reflection in Maya, an eternal other is categorically distinct. Those traditions are surrender traditions. So that's one way of thinking about it. There's loads of ways of thinking about it.
Thank you.
Pastor Chakrabarti would like a few words.
I'm sure he would. Come up here. Maharaj. But Mahashaya. I was terrified this moment would come.
That was a very beautiful, very, very beautiful, with the beauty of truth. Beautiful presentation. But it was not.
And there had to be a but.
It was not. You'll see that the but is not a but. But you cannot interrupt me. So, it was very beautiful, but it was not that than which more beautiful cannot be conceived. Because the Bhagavatam is more beautiful. So I agree 500% with you in everything that you said. I would like to just urge you to consider 3 more Shruti, Vedic, not even Upanishadic, Vedic evidence of God's body other than the golden person. The first is, forget about the denominations, whether it is Shaiva or Shakta. The first is from Samaveda, when Indra goes to, all the gods give up, and Indra faces the formless Yaksha in Kenopanishad. Then there is a description of Uma, who appears.
Uma,
Haimavati.
in the Kena.
Yes. Haimavati, and she is described. Satasmin akashe striyam ajagam umam haimavatim bahushobhamanam. This is clearly an embodied form of God as the Upadeshta. Like she becomes the guru of Indra. Okay, that's one. Second,
But is she a Deva or is she Bhagavan?
she's not a Deva.
Not a Deva.
No. She's not a Deva. And Shankara talks about this. Secondly, Tryambakam Jajamahe. The word Tryambaka means 3-eyed. There are 3 eyes. Eyes are body parts. Very clearly, this is Yajurveda mantra and very much used all over. Second evidence. Third is the most, anyone who has done as after your Upanayana, one has worshipped a Shalagram. You know the Shalagram Shila.
This is a Shaligram.
Right. So you have to bathe it with a mantra which is right under your nose of an embodied God. Sahasra Shirsha. 1,000. Not allegorical. The word Sahasra may be allegorical, marking infinite. Sahasra head. Sahasra Shirsha. Purusha. Sahasra Aksha. Sahasra Bhat. Savamigum Sarvataspratva Atyatishtat Dashangulam. Right? So these 3 evidences, I would like you to add to your thing.
That is a wonderful gift. Thank you so much. I'll have to write them down afterwards.
Right.
Yeah.
Secondly, you have shown courage in entering, as it were, the Advaita lion's den. But
That's why the Swami is not here.
no, but Sarvapriyanandaji would have been the first person to admit, you haven't shown more courage against Advaitins than Swami Vivekananda himself. When he comes back, he gives lectures after, like the Indians start to recognize that there is a poet called Tagore after he gets the Nobel Prize. They recognize, in spite of Sri Ramakrishna's certificate 10 years before, that this is Shiva himself who has come to, Vivekananda.
Yeah.
But India has to wait for it. America and Chicago lecture. That's how we are. So after he comes back, he gives a series of lectures, beautifully edited in a volume called Lectures from Colombo to Almora. In one of them, all you have to do to get to the real Vivekananda's real conviction, like this gentleman was asking you, what is your personal practice? Even Vivekananda's own apostle brother monks, whom he worshipped, like his teacher, Guru Putreshu, about Brahmananda and all. But they would have to provoke him, make him angry, to speak the real mind of him. So at one point somebody was telling that you are into Narendranath Datta, this Vivekananda. This is before America, after Sri Ramakrishna's passing away. That you are constantly telling us about Advaita and, I am not this, I am not that, like Chidananda Rupa, Shivoham. But Thakur, that is Ramakrishna, was a believer in bhakti. And he had prema. The implication was, and I'm not naming that Swamiji, he was also Siddha Mahaprusha. But he said to Narendranath that Thakur was not like you. He had all the, like you said, not just all philosophies, but all the paths. And he prioritized the path of love. And they used the word prema. Vivekananda got angry. And he said, this is in Saradananda's Leela Prasanga, a book. He said, what do you understand about prema? Thakur had said, only two people in human form had prema. One is Radharani, the other is Mahaprabhu Chaitanya.
Chaitanya.
Yes. This is called Mahabhava. All of you, when you get all emotional in bhakti, you've got bhava. But Mahabhava nobody has. Thakur has given me that prema. You are servant class. Go make a pot of tobacco for me.
A pot of?
Tobacco. Let me smoke that. He got angry. Because at the end of his life, he writes this Bengali poem. And he says, Jnana, Yoga, these are Buddhi Bivram. Prema, ei matra sar. There is nothing else. He said, this ocean of life is turbulent with different philosophical views. Which, by the way, unlike you, Brahma did not decry. He knew. I was just hoping that you will, in this this talk, you will use two crucial Shastric evidences. And you did. One was Avajananti Mangmura, and the other was Brahma's Tuti after his befuddlement.
Yeah, beautiful.
And the befuddlement is described that the creator on his swan fainted. And then he got up and did the stuti. And in that stuti, and with this I'll end, Brahma, doesn't denounce my profession, philosophers, okay? Doesn't say you will not be liberated. He said, like a mother, he is addressing Krishna, said that Krishna, you are like a mother in whose womb several children, that is fetuses, are kicking away. And with that kick, they are almost hurting the mother. But you are very happy when they disagree with each other and they kick at each other, because this is what the mother enjoys. Because in your womb are all these philosophers. And what you did not end, thank God, is the lotus. It is a mystery and a deep thing. And the mystery is best understood if one thinks of the last chapter of the Bhagavatam, the Leela of Markandeya, with the child swallowing, and inside there is eons of world, and there again a child, and so on. And how do we end? With Sri Aurobindo's name. Aurobindo. Aurobindo means lotus. And this is not exactly in the Bhagavatam, but it's in the tradition. We all end up the puja of Gopala, which, by the way, is one of the greatest lady disciples used to see Sri Ramakrishna as this Gopal. Right? So that verse, I will not translate, everybody understands. Sucking the toe lotus with the hand lotus, putting it in the mouth lotus, a baby is found. Karara vindena, padara vindam, mukhara vinde, viniveshayantam, vatasya patrasya, puteshayanam, balang mukundam, shirasanama. And that is very much more than Sri Ramakrishna's, Vivekananda's view. And in that lecture he said, for the West and the rationalist West, and for the missionaries who misunderstood us, I have preached monism, I have preached Advaita, because, notice this, it is easier to understand.
Yeah.
I have not preached, I will never preach Gopi Prema. And he quotes the most erotic verse about envying the lower lip of, envying the flute, because it touches the lower lip of Krishna.
Sure.
And he ends by saying, and he quotes in that Vivekananda, the so-called great Advaitin, about whom the popular image is of for lower people bhakti, for the ultimate truth, this thing. Just the opposite. Aksharaja pichottama is Purushottama. And he said, Suratavardhanam, Shokanashanam, Swarita Venuna, Sushtu Chumbitam, Itara Raga Vismaranam, Nidam, Vitara Vir, Naste Adaramritam. He was, Vivekananda, in the deepest soul, after that lower lip of Krishna. And lower lip cannot exist without a body.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I have to write down some of those references. Thank you so much, Arvind.
I think we have to have both of you come back and do a full session.
That would be.
But I want to thank.
I will sit at the feet, and Mahashaya will take the podium.
Ed, I know you say you're retiring, but you have to come back.
Oh, of course.
You have to. All right.
Absolutely.
So please keep in touch. This was absolutely wonderful. Your enthusiasm took us way into your world.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's called Rajaguna, but we'll go with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we just everybody Brindavan farewell? Jai Sri Sri Radhe Sham.